Part 1: The Funeral. My grandfather left me a key. I wish I never used it. I never believed family secrets could survive for decades. Movies made it seem exciting. Books made it seem romantic. In real life, I thought secrets eventually disappeared with the people who carried them. I was wrong. Sometimes, a secret waits patiently. Not for years. Not for decades. For an entire lifetime. And sometimes, it chooses exactly the right moment to find someone new. In my case, it began 3 days after my grandfather died. His funeral was strangely quiet. There were fewer than 20 people standing around the grave. Most were neighbors. A few distant relatives I barely recognized. No old friends. No former coworkers. No stories about his younger years. Looking back, that should have been my first warning. A man who lived for 86 years should have left behind hundreds of memories. Instead, almost nobody seemed to know anything about him before he was 40. At the time, I simply assumed he had lived a quiet life. Now I know. He made sure nobody could learn the truth. My grandfather wasn't the kind of man who talked much. He wasn't cold. He wasn't unfriendly. He simply avoided speaking about himself. Whenever I asked about his childhood, he smiled, changed the subject, asked me about school instead. When I became older, I noticed something even stranger. There wasn't a single photograph of him as a young man. Not one. Every family album began sometime in the early 1970s. Nothing before that. No wedding pictures. No military service. No teenage photographs. Nothing. My grandmother once told me that many old photos had been destroyed in a house fire. Everyone accepted the explanation, including me. After the funeral, the family gathered inside my grandfather's small farmhouse. It sat alone at the edge of town, the same place where he had lived for more than 50 years. The atmosphere felt awkward. People weren't grieving. They were waiting to see who inherited what. My grandfather had never been wealthy. The house was old. His pickup truck barely ran. There wasn't much money. My uncle received the property. My aunt inherited most of the furniture. My mother was given several family keepsakes. When my name was finally called, the lawyer frowned. There is something unusual. He reached into a small leather briefcase. Inside was an old wooden box, about the size of a cigar case. The surface was scratched. The brass lock had turned green with age. A small label had been taped to the lid. Simply read, "For Ethan." My name. Everyone looked confused. So, my uncle laughed. "You got the mystery box." A few people smiled politely. I forced a laugh. Honestly, I felt disappointed. The others had inherited something useful. I had received an old box. The lawyer handed it to me carefully. "He specifically instructed me to give this only to you." I asked why. He hesitated. "I don't know." He never explained. I waited until late that evening before opening it. I don't know why. Part of me felt guilty. Another part felt curious. The box opened with surprising ease. Inside, there was almost nothing. A single old brass key. Heavy. Cold. Unlike any house key I had ever seen. Beside it lay a folded piece of yellowed paper. My grandfather's handwriting was unmistakable. Neat. Precise. Almost painfully careful. Contained only one sentence. "Don't let anyone know you have this key." Nothing else. No explanation. No signature. Just those 9 words. I stared at the note for several minutes. At first, I actually laughed. This has to be one of Grandpa's old jokes. He loved practical jokes. Maybe this was his final one. Maybe somewhere inside the house there was an old chest full of coins. Or perhaps the key opened nothing at all. Still, something about the handwriting bothered me. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't playful. It looked urgent, almost frightened. That night, couldn't sleep. The key sat on my bedside table. Every time I looked at it, I felt strangely uncomfortable. Around 2 in the morning, I heard gravel crunch outside. Very slowly, Car drove past my house, then stopped. No headlights, no engine, just silence. I looked through the curtains. A black SUV sat across the street. Someone was inside, watching. After nearly 5 minutes, it slowly drove away. I convinced myself I was imagining things. People drive at night. Nothing unusual, right? The following afternoon, I visited my mother. I almost showed her the key. Almost. Then I remembered the note. Don't let anyone know you have this key. Instead, I casually asked, did Grandpa ever own a safe? She looked surprised. No. What makes you ask? I don't know. I was just curious. She shook her head. Your grandfather hated banks. He never trusted them. Then she paused. Actually, there was one thing. When I was little, I remember him leaving town once every year. He always wore his best suit. He never told anyone where he went. I asked where. She smiled. I don't remember. I was probably 8. Then she added something that made my stomach tighten. And every single time, he locked his bedroom before leaving. That evening, I decided to examine the key more closely. Using my phone's flashlight, I noticed tiny engraved numbers on one side. Very faint, almost invisible. 317B. Below the numbers, there was a tiny symbol. Not a company logo. Not a manufacturer. A bank. I searched online. Within seconds, my heart started beating faster. The symbol belonged to a private bank in downtown Chicago. A bank that still existed. And according to its website, it still offered safe deposit boxes. Suddenly, the note made perfect sense. This wasn't a house key. It wasn't decorative. It opened something. Something my grandfather had hidden for decades. I decided I would drive there the next morning, just to satisfy my curiosity. Nothing more. I had no idea that someone else had been waiting for this key for over 60 years. And before I even reached Chicago, they would find me. Part 2. The safe deposit box. Someone else was waiting for the key. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the note again. Don't let anyone know you have this key. It didn't sound mysterious anymore. It sounded like a warning. By sunrise, I had already made my decision. I was driving to Chicago. If the key really belonged to a safe deposit box, I wanted answers. Not next week. Not next month. Today. The drive took almost 4 hours. Rain followed me the entire way. The kind of slow, gray rain that makes every highway feel endless. I kept telling myself I was overthinking everything. Maybe the box had been empty for years. Maybe the bank had destroyed its contents decades ago. Maybe this would all end with an embarrassed apology from a bank employee. But deep inside, I knew that wasn't going to happen. Around noon, I finally reached downtown. The bank stood exactly where Google Maps had shown it. An old stone building surrounded by modern skyscrapers. It looked like it had survived 100 years without changing. Heavy bronze doors, marble columns, security cameras everywhere. The place felt less like a bank, and more like a fortress. Inside, everything was silent. The marble floors echoed beneath my footsteps. An elderly receptionist smiled politely. Good afternoon. How may we help you? I placed the key on the counter. Her smile disappeared. She picked it up carefully, turned it over, examined the engraving, then looked directly at me. One moment, please. Without another word, she disappeared through a secured door. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, a man wearing a dark gray suit approached. Unlike the receptionist, he wasn't smiling. Mr. Carter? I nodded. My name is Richard Evans. I'm the branch manager. There are a few things we need to verify. He led me into a private office. I handed him my driver's license. He compared it to something on his computer. His expression slowly changed. Confusion, then surprise, then disbelief. He looked back at me. You are Ethan Carter? Yes. And Harold Carter was your grandfather? Yes. He leaned back in his chair. I honestly never thought I'd see this day. Those words made my stomach tighten. What do you mean? He hesitated, then opened a thick folder. Our records indicate that this deposit box has remained untouched for 63 years. I blinked. 63? He nodded. It was rented in 1963. The contract has been renewed every single year. The payments were always made anonymously. I stared at him. My grandfather kept paying for it. For over 60 years? Richard nodded slowly. And according to the instructions attached to the account. Only one person was ever allowed to open it. He looked directly at me. You. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I was 27 years old. The account had been opened long before I was born. Long before my parents were even married. How could my grandfather possibly know my name? Richard seemed just as confused. The paperwork is unusual. He specifically amended the ownership several years ago. He left very detailed instructions. What instructions? He hesitated again. That the box should never be opened until after his death. And only by you. A strange feeling settled over the room. My grandfather had planned this. Years in advance. Maybe decades. He knew exactly who would eventually sit in this chair. Me. Richard stood. If you're ready, I'll take you downstairs. The vault was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Steel doors, concrete walls, dozens of security cameras. Rows upon rows of numbered deposit boxes stretched across the room. Richard stopped in front of one. 317B. The same numbers engraved on my key. This is it. He stepped aside. This part is yours. My hands were shaking. The old brass key slid into the lock perfectly. I turned it. A quiet click echoed through the vault. Richard inserted a second master key. Another click. The drawer slowly slid outward. For 63 years. Nobody had opened it. Until now. I expected jewelry, cash, maybe old family documents. Instead, I found a thick brown envelope. 3 black and white photographs. A leather passport. Several newspaper clippings. And an old cassette tape. Nothing else. No gold. No fortune. No treasure. Just memories. Or so I thought. The passport immediately caught my attention. The photograph showed my grandfather. Only, he looked about 25 years old. The problem wasn't the picture. It was the name. It didn't say Harold Carter. It said, Daniel Novak. I froze. I checked again. Same face. Different name. Different birthday. Different place of birth. Nothing matched the man I had known my entire life. What is it? Richard asked. I couldn't answer. I simply handed him the passport. He looked at it for a few seconds, then slowly gave it back. I assume. That's not the name you were expecting. I shook my head. No. My grandfather's name was Harold Carter. Richard quietly replied. Apparently. It wasn't. Before I could process that discovery, something slipped from inside the envelope. A folded letter. Unlike the note from the wooden box. This one contained several pages. Across the front, my grandfather had written, If you're reading this, then I have finally run out of time. My heart was pounding. I unfolded the first page. The handwriting was identical, steady, careful, almost painfully neat. The first sentence made every hair on my arms stand up. The man you knew as your grandfather never truly existed. I stared at the words, again, and again. Couldn't breathe. Richard quietly stepped toward the exit. I'll give you some privacy. The heavy vault door closed behind him. I was completely alone. Alone. With 63 years of secrets. I turned the page, ready to discover who my grandfather really was. But before I could read another word, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. A calm male voice spoke only one sentence. You should have left the box closed. Then, the call ended. For a long moment, I couldn't move. Someone knew exactly where I was. Someone knew I had opened the deposit box. And somehow, they had my phone number. I slowly looked back at the letter. For the first time, I realized my grandfather hadn't been protecting a secret. He had been protecting me. Part 3. The Man Who Never Existed. My grandfather's real name was a lie. The phone slipped from my hand. It hit the concrete floor with a sharp crack. For several seconds, I simply stared at it. The call had lasted less than 10 seconds. No threats, no explanation, just one sentence. You should have left the box closed. Someone knew. Not only that I had opened the deposit box, but exactly when, exactly where. I looked around the vault. Rows of steel boxes stretched into the distance. Empty, silent. Yet, for the first time since arriving, I no longer felt alone. I forced myself to breathe. Then I picked up the letter again. My grandfather's handwriting somehow felt different now. Less comforting. More urgent. I continued reading. If you're reading this, then everything has gone exactly as I feared. You are probably frightened. You are probably confused. Good. That means you're still alive. I frowned. Still alive? Who writes something like that to their grandson? The next paragraph answered none of my questions. Instead, created dozens more. The name Harold Carter belongs to the man I became. The name Daniel Novak belongs to the man I buried. Buried? Not literally. I hoped. My grandfather explained that after the winter of 1962, Daniel Novak disappeared forever. Harold Carter appeared only weeks later. Different name, different papers, different life, different future. He never explained why. Not yet. Instead, he wrote something that chilled me. If anyone asks about Daniel Novak, tell them you've never heard the name. Even if I'm already dead. Dead. He kept returning to that word, almost as if dying had never been his greatest fear. Being found. That was what terrified him. I turned another page. Inside the envelope, a faded photograph slipped onto my lap. 3 young men stood beside an old military truck. One of them was unmistakably my grandfather, except he looked no older than 25. He was smiling, the kind of smile I had never seen in real life. On the back, someone had written in blue ink, October 14th, 1962. Nothing else. Another photograph showed the same man standing beside a woman holding a little girl. Neither face looked familiar. No family resemblance. No names. Just strangers. Or people I was never supposed to know. Then I unfolded one of the newspaper clippings. The headline read, "Local investigator disappears without a trace." The article described a detective named Daniel Novak. My heart stopped. The article wasn't about someone who looked like my grandfather. It was about him. Same face, same eyes, same scar above the left eyebrow. The date, November 1962. The detective had vanished. Police suspected foul play. His body was never found. The investigation was eventually closed. I whispered to myself, "No, this can't be real." According to every official record, Daniel Novak had disappeared. Forever. Yet only months later, Harold Carter appeared hundreds of miles away, started a new life, married my grandmother, raised a family, worked 40 years as a carpenter, lived quietly, as though nothing had ever happened. I flipped through the remaining papers desperately. Birth certificate, employment records, military discharge papers. Every single document carried a different name, Harold Carter. But every photograph showed the same man. My grandfather had built an entirely new identity. Piece by piece, the vault suddenly felt colder. I looked toward the heavy steel door. Still closed, still silent. I remembered the phone call. Someone else wanted these documents. Someone else already knew about Daniel Novak. Near the bottom of the box, I finally noticed something I'd ignored. The cassette tape. Plain black cassette. No label. No company logo. Only one handwritten sentence. listen alone. Fortunately, the bank manager returned a few minutes later. I assume everything is in order? I forced a smile. Yes. He glanced at the tape. Interesting. I don't think I've seen one of those in years. Neither had I. Finding something that could actually play it would be difficult. But somehow, I knew the tape contained the real story. Richard handed me another envelope. I almost forgot. This was attached to your grandfather's account. Inside was a single receipt. Not from the bank. From a storage facility. Locker 114. Paid in advance. Until this year. The address was only 20 minutes away. My heart raced again. One secret had just become two. What was inside the storage unit? Why keep paying for it for decades? And why mention nothing about it in the letter? I carefully packed everything back into the envelope. The passport, the photographs, the newspaper clippings, the cassette, the letter. Every instinct told me to leave. Drive home. Forget everything. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. Once it takes hold, it becomes impossible to ignore. Outside the bank, the rain had stopped. The streets were crowded. Businessmen, tourists, families, ordinary people living ordinary lives. Then, I noticed him, across the street, a man wearing a black baseball cap, standing perfectly still, looking directly at me. The moment our eyes met, he raised his phone, not to call someone, to take my picture. Click. One photo, then another. Without thinking, I crossed the street. Hey! The man turned immediately, walked away, not running, walking, calmly, confidently, as if he knew I would never catch him. By the time I reached the corner, he had disappeared, gone, without a trace. Back in my car. I locked every door. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Someone had followed me to the bank. Someone had photographed me. And judging by that phone call, someone had been expecting this day for years, maybe decades. I started the engine. Instead of driving home, I entered the storage facility's address into my GPS estimated arrival. 22 minutes. I looked once more at the faded receipt. Locker 114. For 63 years. My grandfather had hidden one secret inside a bank. Now, I was about to open another. I had no idea that what waited inside Locker 114 would make everything I'd found so far seem insignificant. Part 4, Locker 114. The storage unit my grandfather paid for. Until he died. The GPS counted down the minutes. 21. 18. 15. Every red traffic light felt longer than the last. I couldn't stop thinking about the man outside the bank. He hadn't looked surprised to see me. He had looked prepared, as though he'd been waiting years for someone to open that deposit box. Maybe he wasn't following me. Maybe he had been following my grandfather all along. The storage facility stood on the edge of an old industrial district. Rows of identical metal buildings stretched into the distance. Most of them looked abandoned. The office was small. A bell rang as I stepped inside. An elderly woman looked up from behind the counter. "Can I help you?" I slid the receipt across the desk. "I think my grandfather rented a unit here." She adjusted her glasses, typed something into her computer, then frowned. "I haven't seen this account in years." She looked at me again. "Harold Carter?" I nodded. "He prepaid this locker decades ago. Nobody has ever opened it. Not once." She handed me a small electronic keycard. Locker 114. End of Building C. I thanked her. Before I turned to leave, she stopped me. "One more thing." I looked back. Yesterday, there was another man asking about the same locker. Every muscle in my body tightened. What did he look like? She thought for a moment. Middle-aged. Dark jacket. Black baseball cap. The same man. He asked whether anyone had come for it. I told him no. He left. She smiled politely. "I suppose he was family?" I forced a smile. "I don't think so. Building C was eerily quiet. Only the distant hum of fluorescent lights echoed through the hallway. Locker numbers climbed higher with every step. 108. 110. 112. Then, the padlock looked almost new. Someone had clearly replaced it over the years. I slid the keycard. A green light flashed. Click. The metal door rolled upward with a loud grinding sound. Dust filled the air. The storage unit was much smaller than I expected. There was no furniture. No boxes stacked to the ceiling. Only one large wooden trunk, an old film projector, a dusty tape recorder, and dozens of neatly labeled VHS tapes. I stood frozen. My grandfather had been paying for this. For 63 years? Every VHS tape carried a handwritten date. One tape for almost every few years. As if someone had been documenting something. Or someone. Then I noticed something strange. Every tape had exactly the same title. For Ethan. My name. Again. I slowly opened the wooden trunk. Inside were hundreds of photographs, organized in envelopes. Each envelope had a year written on it. Every single year of my life. Confused. I opened the envelope marked 2006. Inside were photographs of me, playing baseball, walking home from school, leaving my grandmother's house, celebrating my birthday. I nearly dropped them. I had never seen these pictures before. No one in my family had. Another envelope. There I was again, walking through the mall with friends, leaving high school, standing outside my first job. Someone had photographed me, for years, without me ever knowing. No, I whispered. This isn't possible. I searched every envelope. There were thousands of photographs, not only of me, my mother, my father, my sister, even our house. Whoever had taken them had watched our family for decades. My hands began shaking uncontrollably. Why would my grandfather keep these? Was he watching us? No, that made no sense. He lived hundreds of miles away. Besides, some photographs had clearly been taken while he was in the hospital. Impossible. Near the bottom of the trunk, I found another letter. Unlike the others, this one was sealed. Across the front, my grandfather had written, "Do not read this until you have seen the tape marked 2015. The tape. I suddenly remembered the old cassette recorder. The room also contained a VHS player connected to a small television. Somebody had planned this. Every detail. I searched through the shelves. Finally, I found it. 2015. I inserted the tape. The television buzzed to life. Static filled the screen. For several seconds. Nothing happened. Then, an image appeared. My grandfather, older, sitting alone in a dimly lit room. He looked directly into the camera. Then, directly at me. Almost as if he knew this exact moment would happen. He smiled sadly. "Hello, Ethan. If you're watching this, I've already died." I felt chills run through my entire body. He continued, "I imagine you've already found the passport. And the photographs. And by now, you probably think I lied to everyone." He paused. "No, I lied. To protect all of you." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a black and white photograph. The same photograph I had found inside the bank. 3 young men beside the military truck. He pointed to the man standing on the left. His name was Michael. "He died because of me." He pointed to the second. His name was Victor. "He disappeared because of me." Finally, he pointed to himself. "My name was never Harold Carter." He looked down for several seconds, then raised his eyes again. What he said next made my blood run cold. "I wasn't hiding from the police. I was hiding from the people who still believed I had something that belonged to them." Suddenly, a loud metallic bang echoed through the building. Someone had just slammed the main entrance. Heavy footsteps followed. Slow, steady, getting closer. I immediately paused the tape. The footsteps stopped. Then, a man's voice echoed down the hallway. Calm, cold, almost polite. "Ethan, we know you're inside." I looked toward the storage unit entrance. A shadow slowly appeared beneath the door. Then another. They weren't alone. Someone had finally found locker 114. And they weren't leaving without what my grandfather had hidden. Part 5, the last recording. The truth my grandfather took to his grave. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that makes your heart pound so loudly you wonder if the people outside can hear it. I looked around the storage unit desperately. There was only one entrance. No windows. No back door. No escape. The voice came again. Calm. Patient. Almost friendly. "Ethan, you don't understand what you're holding." Another voice answered from farther down the hallway. "Check the next unit." They weren't guessing anymore. They knew exactly where I was. My eyes darted back to the television. The tape was still paused. My grandfather's face stared back at me, frozen in time. I had to know the truth. Quickly, I pressed play. He looked directly into the camera. "If they've found you, then I'm sorry. I spent 60 years trying to make sure this day would never come." He took a long breath. "I suppose I owe you the truth. My real name was Daniel Novak. I worked as an investigator, not for the police, for a private intelligence group. We investigated organized crime, political corruption, missing people. There was one case that should never have existed." He leaned closer to the camera. "We discovered a network of influential men. Judges, business owners, politicians. They weren't criminals in the usual sense. They were far more dangerous. They erased people. If someone became a problem, they simply disappeared. No records, no bodies, no witnesses, only silence. My partners, Michael, Victor, and I, collected enough evidence to expose them. Photographs, audio recordings, financial documents, everything." He paused. "But someone betrayed us." The screen went quiet for a moment. I could hear my own breathing. Then my grandfather spoke again. "They killed Michael. Victor vanished. I was supposed to be next. So I disappeared first. I became Harold Carter. I married. I had children. I became your grandfather. But I never stopped looking over my shoulder. Outside. Metal scraped against concrete. Someone was trying to force open another storage unit. They were getting closer. My grandfather reached beneath the table. He placed an old leather notebook in front of the camera. "This is what they wanted. It contains every name, every payment, every person involved. I never gave it to the police." I frowned. "Why not?" As if he could hear my question. He answered, "'Cause I didn't know who I could trust. They spent decades looking for this notebook. They never found it. Because—" He smiled for the first time. "I never kept it." I stared at the screen. If it wasn't in the bank, and it wasn't here, then where? He slowly lifted something into view. A brass key. The same key he had left me. Then he laughed quietly. "No, not this one." He reached into his pocket again. A second key. Almost identical. Except smaller. "If you're seeing this, the second key is already yours." My heart stopped. Second key? I had only received one. Then I remembered. The heavy brass key from the wooden box had felt unusually thick. Too thick. Almost hollow. Outside. The voices grew louder. "This one. I think he's here." A loud crash echoed through the hallway. My grandfather continued speaking. "The larger key contains the smaller one. I had it custom made. No one ever thought to examine it. If you've figured that out, you're already smarter than I was." I grabbed the brass key from my pocket. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. Looking closely, I noticed something I'd never seen before. A tiny seam, running around the center. I twisted it. Nothing. I twisted harder. Click. The key separated into two pieces. Inside, hidden for decades, was a tiny silver key. Couldn't believe it. The entire time, I'd been carrying two keys. The television played the final part of the recording. The silver key opens a safety box beneath St. Andrew's Church. It has remained untouched for over 60 years. The notebook is there. So is everything they were willing to kill for. He became silent, his eyes filled with tears. Ethan, if you're watching this, I failed. I wanted this secret to die with me. But now, you have a choice. You can destroy everything and finally end this. Or you can reveal the truth. But understand this. If you choose the second path, they will come for you. They always do. He looked away from the camera, then back one final time. I hope, one day, our family can finally live without fear. He smiled, the same gentle smile I remembered from childhood. I love you. The screen faded to black. The tape ended. The storage unit fell silent. No more voices. No more footsteps. I carefully walked toward the entrance. Empty. The hallway was deserted. The men had vanished, almost as if they knew. They were already too late. I stood there for several minutes, holding the tiny silver key in my hand. Everything my grandfather had sacrificed. Every lie, every sleepless night, every year spent looking over his shoulder, had led to this moment. The police never found the notebook. Neither did the mysterious men. And neither did I, because I never went to St. Andrew's Church. Not that day. Not the next week. Not even the next year. The silver key still sits inside a small wooden box in my home, exactly where my grandfather wanted it to be. Sometimes, late at night, I take it out. I wonder what waits inside that final safety box. I wonder whether anyone is still searching for it. Then I remember the last words my grandfather ever spoke to me. Some secrets protect the truth. Others protect the people you love. So the box remains locked. And perhaps, some doors are never meant to be opened.